Hi everyone. Sorry for the delay. I had to do some setting up. Um, I had to do some setting up I before the class, so it took a while, took longer than I expected. Okay. Um, Hope you're having a nice weekend. Today we are going to be talking about CSS fundamentals, and I'm going to touch a couple of topics, but I'm going to be faster than I was last weekend because last weekend I took some time because we started CSS last weekend, so I needed to like basically break a lot of things down. But I'm assuming that based on the discussions we had last week and the resources I shared, at least some of you may have gone through them and maybe kind of grasp like what we are doing here. And at least what I'm going to talk about today, you probably have an idea or you've read up about it, but it doesn't matter actually. The point is, I'm not going to dwell on things as much as I did the last time. Yeah, as long as I did the last time. So, I'm just going to quickly reiterate on the things that we talked about, and then I'll talk about I'll talk about the things that we'll be touching today. So last week we talked about CSS and I talked about a couple of things. I talked about the types of CSS, the internal, the inline, the external. I talked about styling, sorry, I talked about styling. We styled the registration form. We styled the registration form. We used classes. We used uh, IDs. We used tag. So we talked about selectors. We use the class selector, the ID selector, the tag selector, the attribute selector, and we talked a bit about colors and properties. So we talked about properties, which font family, font size, color, everything that we talked about, background color, and the rest of other things. We talked about value, we talked about fonts, and we played around with Google Font a bit, and then I talked about colors for a bit, but I said I was going to continue. I'll explain and basically talk about colors in detail in this class, which is the first thing I'm going to start with. That's the thing I'll start with. I'll talk about colors. I'll talk about the box model. And I think if there's still time, I'll talk about layouts. Hopefully, hopefully, I can talk about layouts today, hopefully. So colors. So if you remember, I talked about the fact that you can use colors, the names of colors in your CSS code, and they'll work just fine. I think CSS has about 100 and something colors like the names of colors, predefined colors by names. And that's what we've been using so far. We've used blue, we've used red, we've used white, green, and so on, so black. But that's kind of like a limited list, right? The list is limited. You can't, there are some colors that don't actually have a name. So it's important to learn how to define colors yourself without having to use the name of that color, especially if the name does not even exist. If it's a color you probably made up or whatever. There are three ways you can use colors in CSS. There are four ways. This way, which is like the name of the color, with hexadecimal numbers, with RGB or HSL. There's with RGB, with HSL. So that those are four. Names, hexadecimal numbers, RGB, HSL. I'm going to explain what all this means. We are going to talk about RGB first. RGB, some of you may have heard some of you may have heard of RGB before. I think this is to right, okay. RGB. So RGB basically stands for red, green, and blue. That's all. That's what RGB stands for. Red, green, and get red, green, and blue. Why these three colors? You can use these three colors, a combination of these three colors to make any color in the world, right? Any color that exists. Just the right mixture of these colors can give you or the right combination of these colors can give you any color. And I'll show you how you can do that in CSS, right? So there's we are going to talk about hexadecimal colors, hexadecimal numbers. So we'll use hexadecimal numbers to derive colors. And then we are going to talk about RGB, and we are going to talk about HSL. I'll actually not dwell on HSL because it's not a common way of using colors in CSS. Some people do use it, but the most common method you see, or the most common colors you see in CSS, are hexadecimal colors that were made from hexadecimal numbers or RGB. And basically they achieve exactly the same thing. The difference is just how they are represented or how they are used, basically. So RGB is basically at the foundation level or the basic of all this. Both HSL and hexadecimal numbers use the three colors to make other colors, right? So there's a function in CSS called RGB. So let's say I wanted this color to be red as it is right now. I'm going to open our browser. I think, one second, let me move my camera. Okay. This is the color. This is the, we basically styled these labels, the first name and last name. So that's the username class that we used, and we gave it the color red. I'm going to change it to green, so we are sure that that's what we are changing. So you see, it's green. Okay, so we want to use RGB to get red. We want to use the RGB function to get the color red without using the name red, right? So I'm going to teach you how to use the RGB function. It's called a function because it basically achieves a single goal. So its goal is to take in a couple of values and output a color as basically the result, right? So RGB, if you are using VS Code and you've installed, I don't think you have to install anything, honestly. Do you? I think this came up in my last class. I was talking about Pretty and I forgot to drop it in the chat, in the description of the video. I think I'll talk about it here before the end of the class. Hopefully I'll remember. So the RGB function takes in three values. The first value is the red value. The second value is the green value. The third value is the blue value. How do you know which value to pass to the RGB? How do those values look like? And I'm going to show you. The RGB function expects values, whether for red, blue, or green, to be between 0 and 255. This basically sets the intensity of the color. How much of red do you want to be in the final color that you are getting from the RGB function? So the intensity ranges from 0 to 255. And if we are to achieve red here, we will have 255, which is the highest intensity of red, comma, 0, comma, 0. Why do we have these zeros here? We want to achieve red, we want to get red color, right? So this function, RGB, we don't need the green, we don't need the blue, we just need the red. So that's why the value of green is 0. Mistakenly pulled this up. The value of green is 0 and the value of blue is 0. But the value of red is 255, which is the highest intensity of red. I'm going to reduce that value gradually so you see the difference between the high and low intensity, right? I'll save this. My VS Code has automatically shown me the color here. So we obviously know this is red. And you see here, the labels are red. I'm going to reduce the intensity. I'll change this to 150. Remember, I read it from 0 to 255. If I use anything above 255, it will not actually look, it will not work. because it's beyond the range that is expected. So this will give us kind of like a maroon type red. You can see here. That's because I reduced the intensity. The lower it goes, the more it looks like black, the darker it gets. The lower, the darker. The higher, the brighter. So 0 will be absolutely black because that's no color at all. No red, no green, no blue. It gives you black. So as you keep increasing that value, it adds basically shades of red to black, thereby making it from, low intensity to high intensity. So it basically looks darker until it gets lighter towards 255. So if I change this to 0, it will give us black because this is no color at all, no red, no green, no blue. So we get black, right? Same with if I set this to highest intensity red, green, sorry, that's a mistake, 255, and blue. High intensity mixture of these colors gives us white. So that's at the end, or the edge, the end of the range. So we've said 255 for the three colors, the red, green, and blue. It gives us white. You can see it's actually here, but because it's white, it blends into the background. You can't actually see. So how we've achieved red, we can actually use the same method to get blue, to get green, and I'm going to show you. So if you want to get green, we don't need red, we don't need blue, we just need green. And that's what we will get, green, right? Same with same with blue. To get blue, we don't need red, we don't need green, we need blue. So we set the intensity to 255, and we'll get our blue, right? We can reduce this to whatever we want. If I say 5, it will be really, really dark. It will actually not look like blue, it will look more like black because it's just 5. The intensity here is just 5, right? So that's basically how the RGB function works. Some people prefer to use this method to get colors. Some people prefer to use other methods, right? So I'm going to talk about the hexadecimal numbers. So I'll not talk about number bases. I'll not talk about number bases, but basically the hexadecimal numbers range from 0 to 9, and then A to F, I think, right? A, B, C, D, E, F. Yes, I think A to F also. So I'm not going to tell you why, because that's a different topic from what we are talking about here. But that's basically hexadecimal numbers, right? And yes, I think it's A to F. So 1, 2, 3, base 16. Yeah, A to F. Okay, so I was correct. I was just trying to confirm in my head. Okay, so hexadecimal numbers, in order to use them to get colors, the structure of this is entirely different from RGB. And this is how it works. For you to get a hex number, to get a color with hex numbers, you start with a hash. I know we talked about hash before, and I told you wherever you see hash in CSS, it's an ID, which is actually correct, but only if that is a selector, right? This here is a value. So if you see hash in a value, it most likely is a color, right? But if you see hash in a selector, then it's an ID. So let's be clear on that front. So it starts with a hash. You cannot make a color with RGB numbers without using hash first. So hash, it has to start with a hash. Now, when you use the hash symbol, the hexadecimal numbers, the combination of hexadecimal numbers that make colors are supposed to be either 3 or 6. So by standard, it's 6, but there's a shorthand where you basically use 3, which I don't really advise because there has to be a certain case where 3 would apply, three of the numbers, but ideally it's 6. So I'm going to show you 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. These are 6 zeros, right? Every pair represents a color. So Since there are six, remember I talked about RGB. The first two represents red, the second two represents green, and the last two represent blue. So like I said before, the base of colors in CSS is red, green, and blue. They are just represented differently, but that's basically, so you use a combination of these colors to make any color you want. And so, like I said, the first two represent red, the second two represent green, the last two represent blue. The intensity is what you set that determines, or that basically shows a color, the color that you wish to display, the color that you wish to use. I'm going to copy this and use it in our code. So we'll take out the RGB function since we've talked about it, and I'm going to paste that color here. This is black, and I'll explain why. You remember in the RGB function, setting red, green, and blue to 0, you are basically telling the code, I don't want any color at all. I don't want any intensity for red, green, and blue. I just want 0 of all these, so give me black. If you set them to 255, which is like at the highest intensity, you get white, right? That works. That's exactly how the hexadecimal number system works too. So this is the least number in the hexadecimal numbers can also be referred to as base 16 numbers. So I'll use that interchangeably, so you don't get confused. That's why I'm telling you. I'm just mentioning it now. Excuse me. So this is the least number, which is 0, right? So you are basically saying I don't want I want 0 intensity for green, yellow, green, blue, and green. Red, green, and blue, sorry. So give me black. That's basically what it means. And like I mentioned earlier, hexadecimal numbers range from 0 to 0 to 9, A to F. So when you count from 0 to 9, you start counting from A to F, right? So that means the highest number in the system is F. Makes sense, right? Least number 0, highest number F. So if I'm setting red, green, and blue to 0, it means I want black. But if I change this to the highest number, it's like the RGB function I talked about. It's like setting intensity, right? So you set this to F, set both of them to F, uh, the uh, the red, green, and blue to F, which is like the highest number in the 16 base system, or the base 16 system. You're basically telling the code that this is the highest, I want the highest intensity for all three colors, and that mixture will give us white, or that combination will give us white, right? That's why you see white here. If I save this, we go back, we see our labels are actually white and basically invisible because they're blended into the background, since the background is white. But if you are to get red, just like we did with the RGB function, since the first two numbers here represent red, I'll change the second two and the last two to zeros, telling the code that I want highest intensity for red, no intensity for green, no intensity for blue. It basically gives you red. So that's the combination. That's how it works. You don't have to know this. You don't have to know this color math in your head. That's the funny thing. You just have to understand how it works. Nobody, I don't think even people that have 30, 40 years coding experience, or even the inventors of CSS, they don't actually know a lot of colors in their head, but they just know how the system works. You can actually get colors. For example, if I was to get a particular color now, just hovering on this opens a palette for me, and I can basically drag it around and get, you can see the combination of colors here, drag it around, get whatever color I want to get. But I'm just trying to explain this to you so you understand how it works. So when you see something like this, you don't get confused. You understand that this here are a combination of numbers that will basically give you a particular color, right? And what I did on my IDE, I don't know if it is operating system based, but I don't want to assume that everybody that has VS Code installed has this. I'm guessing it's kind of like an extension doing this, like prettier. I'm going to check. But you can also achieve this on your browser. I talked about the developer console, the developer tool, in the first class or the second class, I can't remember. And I think I got there too fast, so I'm going to show you how to go there again. Uh, when you right click, you'll be presented with a list of options. The last one usually is inspect, if you are using Chrome browser, of course. But if you are using Safari, you are using Opera Mini, you are using Mozilla Firefox, just look for the inspect item or option on the list. Clicking on it will open this. Mine is on the right. A lot of people by default it will be at the bottom. You can move it to the right. If you were in my last class or my previous classes, I actually talked about this, and I think if you were not, you can actually go back to the video. So yeah, so we're talking about colors. I'm going to click on this. I talked about this before, and hover on the text. You can see here, this is our CSS. That's the beautiful thing with developer tools. So you are presented with the HTML and the CSS here. You can manipulate it, though it will not change in your file system, it will not change in your code. You can just basically play around with it here on the browser to see how it looks like and decide on what to do. Sometimes I do this for fun, or when I'm trying to find or try to design something real quick without having to change anything in my code base. So clicking on this opens up the same color palette, and you can just drag around and get any color you want. There are also color generators online that you can just Google, get like color generators online to give you beautiful colors. But most important thing is understand how the hexadecimal system works, which we've talked about. So this basically means 0 of red CB, like I said, A to F. So C is actually hexadecimal number, B is 0A. So this combination gives us this particular shade of green, whatever it is. I don't know if it has a name. So that's how the hexadecimal system works. And HSL basically stands for hue, saturation, and I think luminosity, which it's the same kind of like the same function with the RGB, but you are setting, let me quickly use it here so you see. HSL, you use, instead of using 0 to 255, you use percentages. So here you are setting the hue to 0%, saturation 0%, and the luminosity 0%. This will give us black. I'm guessing. I don't use HSL, so it's kind of okay. Yeah, it gives us black. If you set this to 100%, it gives you white, because you are basically combining red, green, and blue in their highest intensity, and that combination gives us white. Oh, it did not work. You see, so a lot of people don't use HSL. This is super weird for me. Let me try to understand what's going on here. So I'll use RGB and try to, your browser also can help you change the color system for different colors. Some of you that might end up trying to play with this. So when you click on this, it opens this up, and you can change the system by clicking on this, that icon, the one that has the up and down arrow. Clicking on it, you can select the different types of color. There are a lot of them, actually, like a couple of them, but the ones I've talked about, there's HSL here. Okay, so HSL uses degree and percentage, for degree for hue, and then percentage for saturation, percentage for luminosity. That was my mistake. Okay, but it's kind of complex. I would not actually like to go into this because it will just take our time, and it's not commonly used actually. So there's no point. But it's good that you understand that it exists. So I'm just going to take this back to our original color, which we used was, I'll use the hexadecimal. So we have our red. Yeah. So our original red color that we had before. Yeah, so that's basically how colors in CSS work. Uh, every website you see on the internet uses these systems, and I think it's something to have at the back of your mind when you visit a website. You can you can basically open the developer console, the developer tool on any website, and just play around, see how the HTML looks like, see how the CSS looks like, right? So that's that about colors. Um, I'm going to talk about the box model now, so I'll be quick. I'll be fast. I've talked about the div tag before, and I said the div tag is kind of like an empty container that you use to structure a HTML page, right? So this is what I'm going to do. With this, our profile.html, which is empty, I'm going to create a div here which will serve as our container, and we'll play around with it a bit. So I basically explain how the box model, what the box model is, and what it involves, or what it's about, right? So I'm going to create a HTML tag here, a HTML tag, a head tag, and a body tag. Yeah. And in this body, we are going to have a div which will be empty, and we'll use the internal CSS. Since we are basically going to be talking about the div, and we are going to be on this page, I don't want to play around with this CSS that we wrote in the previous class. So we are going to use the internal CSS here on this page. I'll go to this page on the browser by going to profile.html. So you can see that it's empty. That's because we've not written anything apart from our div. I'll give our div a class name, or maybe an ID, since it's only the thing, that's the only thing we'll be styling. So we are going to call this container, right? And we will do our style here. Remember, the internal CSS, you use the style tag in the head section, and we are going to select that div container, and we'll style it. So the div basically gives you an empty box. You can do with this box whatever you want. Whatever you put inside the box, however you structure the box, it's your choice. It just gives you an empty box. You use CSS to basically style the box however you want. Now um there are some things that I'm going to talk about for the div. We're going to talk about what can go into the div. We are going to talk about paddings, we're going to talk about border, we're going to talk about margins. So I'm going to put something in this box. I'm going to put a text, a paragraph, or call it this is our box, right? So we have our paragraph here. It doesn't look like a box, of course, but we are going to make it look like one. I'm going to basically highlight it on the page so you see and understand what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give this our box a background color, and I'll set the background color to red. In fact, I think I should start using the hexadecimal so you basically understand. And you can use capital and small letters, they'll all work. So you see, this is our box. It's an empty box. Now we've put the text inside, so it's no longer empty. This box, we can give it what is called a padding. A padding is the space between the edge of the box to the content. So the content of this box is a paragraph. You can see it basically takes the entire height of the box, right? Takes the entire space. But if we give the box a padding, we will be setting a distance between the edge of the box to where the content of that box will start from. So I'm going to show you how to do that. CSS has a padding property that takes in that takes in basically units. So remember we talked about the pixel units, the points, and the rest of other ones that we talked about. But most commonly pixel is used, so I'll be using pixel throughout this class. I'm going to set the padding to 10 pixels. You can see here that our text no longer takes the entire space of the box. That's because we have set a distance from the edge of the box to where the padding to where the content starts, which is 10 pixels from the left to the content, 10 pixels from the top to the content, 10 pixels from the bottom to the content. And I'm tempted to set the width of this box. I think I should do that so it's not too confusing. So I'm going to set the width here. I'll explain the width I'm setting. fit content. I'm going to explain this just, yeah. Okay, so you can see we have 10, 10, 10. I know it looks kind of weird. The 10 on the top is kind of, it looks, the space on the top at the top looks more than the space on the left and right. And that's kind of how CSS behaves when it comes to dealing with like vertical spaces. So, but I assure you, this is 10 pixels. This is, let me hover on this so you get my point. This here, you can see the browser actually has this tool that shows you the padding, the border, the margin. I'm going to talk about border and margin, but since we are talking about padding now, you can see the space that is taken by the padding that we set. And after the padding, that's where the content begins, right? This can be useful, especially now that we've added the padding. You see our box looks better than it did before. And we are going to apply this system to our form, and I'll explain. We'll apply the system to our form, and you see how it can change the way our form looks like. And that's there you understand how important it is to use the box model in CSS. Yeah, so you can set the width. I think I should talk about the width now so you don't get confused. You can set the width and the height of any element that you can apply CSS to. Why did I say that? You cannot apply CSS to elements in the head tag. You can only apply CSS to elements in the body tag, right? So all the elements that go into the body tag, you can give that any of them a height and a width. So the width and height properties basically do what their name implies. You can set the height of a property or the width of a property to any figure you wish to. You can also make that property take the space that is available on the browser or on the screen. So if I set the height of this our box to 200 pixels, for example, you'll see that it's taking 200 pixels on the page, right? It's taking 200 pixels on the page. If I set the width to 200 pixels, let's say I took out this feed content, the chat is open. So please, if you have any questions, do well to drop the questions there, and I'll get to it later. So you see we have set the height, the width and the height to 200 pixels, right? We have a square now. You can basically set the height and width of this box to whatever you want. I can say it should be 100%. So percentage is also a unit that you can use in CSS to set the value of something based on its parent. So the parent of this div, the parent of this div is the body. Why is it the parent of the div? That's because the div is inside the body tag. So that's the div is a child of the body tag. So setting this to 100%, the width of the box to 100%, basically makes the box take 100% of the size that its parent has, right? So of the width of its parent. So that's why you see that the box is taking this much space. It's taking, if this is zoomed in, it's taking 100% of the page, right? It has basically stretched to the edge. If I set the height to 100%, it will take 100% of the allowed space by the body. So it's basically taking the entire page. So you can use pixels, you can use points, you can use percentages, you can use something called view height and view width, but I'm not going to talk about those until we get to like responsive design. If hopefully we get to it soon. I'm going to talk about those. I should not have brought up percentage, but since I kind of used it kind of came to me, I used something else like feed content, I thought it would be nice to talk about percentage. The width and height of a property of an element can also let me quickly show you. Okay, the width and height of an element can also be something else. I'm trying to get something here. Okay, it can also be automatic. So when it's auto, it basically takes, it depends on the style of its parent, right? So that's at that point it's automatic. If the parent has a style that makes the box take or the element take 100% to take 100%. Sometimes it will just adapt to the size of whatever its content is. So the size of its content. You can also set the width and height to fit content that would make it basically adjust to the width or the height of whatever it contains, right? So if we set the width of this box to fit content, whatever we put inside the box will adjust to accommodate that content. Max content, basically, if you have, let's say, 4 lines of text and one is way longer, right? It's it's going to take the width of, it's going to use the longest text and determine the width the box is going to be. I don't want to go into detail about this because I intend to talk about this when we do responsive web design. So I'm just going to quickly just run through mean content, the opposite of max content. So I'm going to set this to fit content, for example, and I'm going to, let me take this back. I'll take out the width, the height, sorry. So we have our box fitting the content of the size of the text that we have here. I'm going to add something else to this. This is another test. And you can see that as our text gets longer, the box basically adjusts to fit it. So that's what fit content does. I just wanted to show that. So back to padding. If we increase the padding of the box, it will create more space between the edge of the box to its content, right? So that's basically what padding is. The space between the edge of an element to its content. You can also give this box a border. So a border is basically a line that you style that goes around the box, right? So that's a border. I don't think I even need to explain what a border is, but I just thought I should say that. But before I jump into that, I think there are some things I may have missed about padding. So in case you want to set, because the padding I've been setting here has been for the top, left, right, and bottom. In case you want to set the padding of just one side, you don't want to set the padding of the 4 sides of the box, you can decide to use padding. Let's say you want to set the left side, padding left. So you can decide to use the specific side that you can basically use a property that will add a padding to the specific side that you want to add that padding to. So for example, the left side, padding left, and I set it to 20 pixels. You can see that every other part of the box has basically shrunk to the size of its content, apart from the left side, which we have set 20 pixel padding to, right? If I can also do padding top, which would allow us to set 20 pixel padding or whatever the value to the the top part of the box. So you've seen here that we've added 20 pixels to the top part of the box. So there's a space between the top part of the box to the content. Same, we have padding right and padding bottom, 20 pixels. So this will basically give us exactly what we had before because we've explicitly set the padding of the top, left, right, and bottom. So you can decide to basically add a padding to any side. But if you don't want to do this, if you just want a padding to wrap the entire box, then you can use the padding property instead of having to write 4 lines of code to do exactly the same thing that this would have done. So that's what I wanted to talk about. There are other things about paddings that I've missed, but what I've talked about are basically the basics. And I think most importantly, my goal here is for you to understand how padding works and not basically turn it to the main topic of the day because we have a lot to cover. I'm going to talk about the border. So you can give an element a border, in this case our box, and the border takes in a couple of values. It takes in the type, it takes in the size or the width of the border, and it takes in the color. So I'm going to set, there are types of borders. That is the type of the line that goes around it. That's basically the type of the border that I'm talking about here. The line can be a solid line, a straight up line that goes around the box, or it can be a dotted line, it can be a dashed line, that kind of thing. I'm going to show you here. So I want to create a solid border around our box, and I'll set the width of the border to 2 pixels, and I want the border to be black. So the type here, solid, and the size, 2 pixels, or the width, it's the width actually. I keep making a mistake and calling it size. The width to 2 pixel, and I want the color to be black, right? Like I said, I'm going to be using hexadecimal, so sorry about that. Usually for simplicity, I just type the name of the color if it's something that has a name, if it's a color that has a name, like red. So we have the type of the line, the width of the line, and the color, right? When we save and go to our page, we see that we have a 2 pixel width black border surrounding our box. That's exactly what these values have given us, right? You can set the width of the border to be whatever you want. You can make it 20 pixels, it will be extremely thick. You can make it a, let me take it back to 2 pixel. You can change the type of the line to dashed. I'm not going to talk about all the types of border lines because based on the conversation we had in our previous class, I expect that at least if you read up on the resources I shared, if you basically checked them out, you would have come across something like this. But for the benefit of those that did not, I'm just going to talk about dashed and dotted. So if I change the type of the line to dashed, our border still remains 2 pixel, 2 pixels, to still be black. It's just the type will change from solid to dashed. If I changed it to dotted, it becomes a dotted line basically, right? So you can change the color to whatever you want. If I wanted it to be green, we would have a green border around our red box. So that's how the border works. There are other ways you can set the border, just like the padding. If you don't want the border to go around the if you don't want the border to go around the element, you want to set a side. You can set, let's say we want our border left to have this style, right? You can set that, and the style will be applied to the left. Let me see, maybe I need to zoom this in a bit again. The style will be applied to the left side of our box or of our element, and the rest of the sides will just remain the way they were before. So you can do this at the bottom, bottom, border top, and border right. So I'm going to just tweak this a bit. So let's say we want a solid border bottom of like 4 pixels, and maybe we want it to be black, and same, maybe the top solid and the right dashed. So let's say this should be blue, sorry, blue, and we want this to be red. So did we set the border top? Oh, okay, the background is red, so let's give it another color. Let's pick a color, let's say yellow, for example, something like this. Yeah, so it's visible. Okay, so you see we've set different type borders for the different sides. That's the flexibility that CSS comes with. So basically you can manipulate the border of an element as much as you want, set the type, the color, the width. You can see here, excuse me, you can see here that the border bottom is thicker than the rest of the borders because we set this to 4 pixels, right? So there's also something about borders that you need to know, which is highly important. The border radius, the radius of the border. The edges of the border, you can basically set how round you want them to look, right? So there's a property called border radius, which you can set to, you can use pixels, you can use percentages or points. I'll set this to, let's say 8 pixels. This is going to basically curve the edges of our border. This 4 type border that we did is it doesn't look nice. I'm going to take it out and change it to something that looks better. So I'll set this to solid. Solid 2 pixels, or let's do 3 pixels so it's more visible basically, and black. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So you can see here the edges of the box basically look round because we set the border radius to 8 pixels. If I set it to 2 pixel, you see it will not look as round as it did before. So this basically allows you to create an element or a box and give it a border. I'm heading somewhere here, so I'm not confused. I was going to say you can change the box to a circle, which is exactly what you can do. Because if you set the border high enough, the box just becomes a circle. All the edges become so round, it just becomes a circle. I'm going to show you. So let's say we give this our box a fixed height and fixed width. Say let's give it a height of 200 pixels. It's too big. Say 50 pixels and height of 50 pixels. Let's take a bit of this text out. Let's comment this out. So we will not have any text in there. So now we have just a regular square and we want this to be a circle. We are going to set the border radius to 100%. So we want the border to be round 100%. This will give us a circle plane. So that's how you can actually get a circle. Um, Hopefully this I'm thankful, I'm happy that this class is not about shapes because I was tempted to show you how to get a triangle, but that's aside the point. Okay, so setting the border radius basically gives a curve to the edges of your box. So that's basically what the border radius does. And you might be wondering if you can set border radius for you might be wondering if you can set border radius. I'm taking our code back to how it was. You might be wondering if you can set border radius for an an sorry an edge without having to set border radius for the rest of them. So if you want to set the border radius at the top right corner and you don't want border radius for top left, whatever, you can do that. So I'm going to show you how you do that. I'll take out this border radius because this is kind of like general border radius for all the edges. And I want to make I want to make this to be curved, but I don't want these other edges to be. So these are this is our top right corner, right? This is the top right corner of the box. Now it's important because that's how we are going to target it. So I'll say border top right radius. This is actually a property, and I'll set this to 30 pixels so it's round. And you can see we've set the border of the top right corner, the border radius of the top right corner to 30 pixels, and the rest are just regular, just straight, plain. So that's basically how you can target an edge and give it a radius. So border top right radius, there is border top left radius. You can see here. There is border bottom left radius, and there is border bottom right radius. So this basically just targets the edges of our box and gives it a radius, right? This is going to give us a kind of a round box, yeah. So that's basically how the border radius works. I'm going to take this back and do the regular border radius of 4 pixels. We did 8 pixels before, right? Yeah. Okay, so we have our box. So that's basically the box model. This might not be so useful to you yet until we start using it on our phone, right? I just needed to talk about this. Okay, I'm not talking about margin. I'm going to talk about margin now. So let me show you something real quick. You know, I showed you that you can see your browser developer tool shows you the padding of an element. This is the element here. This is the padding. Hopefully, oh my god, can you imagine my video is actually blocking exactly what I'm talking about and I just realized that. Okay, I'm gonna move my video over here. I'm really sorry. So this is what I was talking about here. I'm really sorry, I keep forgetting to do that. So this is what I was talking about. Your browser, I don't know, I can't zoom this in. It might look really small to you now. Either way, when you do this, when you try to use CSS on your on your computer. This will actually be available on your browser when you open up the developer tools, right? So this is our element here. This is the padding that it has. You can see 20, 20, 20, 20. And this is the border that we set, 3, 3, 3, 3. So you can see as I progress, it basically highlights that aspect of the box, right? So this is really, really helpful because you can basically understand the structure of any element and try to, especially if you are trying to debug something, if maybe you wrote some CSS and it did not work and you're trying to understand why, this can be really helpful. You can see another section here called the margin. I've not talked about the margin yet. I'm going to talk about it next. So the margin is basically that. Now I talked about padding, right? Padding is the space between the edge of the box and its content. A margin is the space between the edge of the box and whatever comes before that box, or the outer part of the box. So this our box does not have any margin, so it's at the top left corner of our page. If I give it a margin, it's going to move away from that area. The more margin it get, I give to it, the more pushed away it's going to be from the top left corner. So the margin of an element is the outer space. So if you have two elements and you set the margin of the right element, you set like a left margin of the right element, it's going to push the element away from the first element. That's because you are setting an outer space. So it's the space between the outer edge of your element and whatever comes before it, right? I think that's the best I can explain, and I'll just head down to show you. So there's a property called margin. I'll set the margin to 10 pixels. I've set the margin of this box to 10 pixels. I'm going to scroll down here. You see the margin is basically highlighted, right? So you see it's 10 pixels. The box is 10 pixels away from its origin. Its origin being the top left corner of the page. It is 10 pixels away. We have basically pushed the box away 10 pixels by 10 pixels. I'm going to set this to 100 pixels so it's kind of more prominent. 100 pixels. You can see that we have pushed our box away from the top left and it's basically towards the center of the page. This is how much margin we have given it, right? So that's basically what the margin is. Margin is outer space, padding is inner space. So if you get confused, that's something to think about. Outer space is margin, inner space is padding. The space between them is a border if you decide to set a border, of course. So you can actually set, just like every other property that I've talked about, the padding, the border, you can actually set margin left, margin right, if you don't want like a margin for every side of the box. So you can set margin left, for example, to 30 pixels, and it moves the box only on the left side. You can see it's back at the top, but there's a space on the left. That's the margin that we set. And if you come down here and you hover, you see that that's the space that is highlighted, the margin, because we set only a left margin. There's margin top, bottom, and right. So margin top, margin bottom, and margin right. Yeah, so that's that. Let me see, we don't have any more time actually. So just to round up, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about layout. I'm going to try to use what we have learned so far and to style our form. So our form will start looking like something that makes sense. So I'll head back to the register.html. So we are back here, and what do we want to do? I think the first thing we have to do is look at our HTML and see how it looks like, and we'll structure our 1 second. I'm trying to set my okay. We'll structure our form, we'll make it look nicer. So let's head back to the page, to the registration form, register.html. This, I'll be really fast with this actually. So because we are just 3 minutes out, 3 minutes to the end of the class. I'm going to push this by like 10 minutes so we can achieve something here. So we have our form. You can see here that our form is wrapped by a div, right? So we have a div here that wraps the entire section of the form, not the form alone, because we have a form title and then we have a form, right? So it wraps the entire section of our form. So what we are going to do is we are going to style this div. Remember, a div is a box. So we are going to style this box so it looks nicer. Hopefully in our next class, I think when I talk about layouts, we are going to also do some styling on our form. What I'm going to do first here, I'll undo all the crazy styles that we've done already. So I'll take out the red colors and everything, the button. I'll just clear out the styles. I'll clear out the styles so we will have a regular form, a regular looking page. And then I am going to give our form container an ID so we can style it, right? So I'll set this ID to form container, right? And we'll target it here in our CSS form container. Let's give it a background color. Background color. I can't think of a color right now, but I'll just type red first, and then I'll pick a color from our palette. Let's say we want it to look bluish in a way, something like this. I just realized I did not talk about transparency, which is what you see here. Actually, you can set the transparency of a color, which we would have talked about the RGBA function and how to use it to set transparency, but we'll still get to it. I don't have to talk about it now. So we'll set our background to be something like this, right? Save. So we have our box here. We want it to take the width of its content. So we are going to set width to fit content. Now, yeah, that's nice. But the content is kind of at the edge, so we want to give it a padding so it looks nicer, right? So we're going to give it a padding of, let's say, 6 pixels. Hopefully that will look nice. 6 pixels. There's too much space at the top. The padding at the top is, I think we want more padding on the left, and we'll reduce the padding at the top. So how we are going to do that is with the padding property, you can actually set the left, right, top and bottom padding without having to use padding left, padding right, padding top, and padding bottom. There's a shorthand that you can use. So the padding property can take in 4 values. That's the 4 values represent the 4 sides of your element or of your box, whatever, right? And passing one value basically sets those 4 values automatically. But if you pass 4 values, you can actually tweak the padding of each side with just the padding property. So if I set this is top, this is right, this is bottom, this is left. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. So that's basically what the 4 values here represent. So if I set this to 60, for example, it will only change the top padding, as you can see. So I just wanted to talk about that. It also takes in 2 values. It can take 2 values. It can take 1 value, 2 values, and 4 values. It can take in 3 values too, but that would be too confusing to talk about. So the 2 values that it takes, this represents the y-axis, which is the top and the bottom, and this represents the x-axis, which is the left and the right, right? So we have too much space at the top and bottom, and we don't have enough space on the left and the right side. So we want to set the top and bottom to 5 pixels, and we want to set the left and the right side to 10 pixels, and we'll see how it looks. It's there. Let's increase this to 15. Okay, it's kind of getting there. Let's make it 20. Okay, I think this looks better. So 20 looks fine. 20 looks better. I'm going to give this container a border radius of 6 pixels. So border radius. So you can set border radius without setting a border. That's another thing I need to mention. The fact that you've not set a border doesn't mean you cannot give a radius to your div or your element, right? It will still actually work fine without you having to set a border. So you see, I've given it border radius of 6 and we've curved it. It looks kind of nice. We want this form to be in the middle of the page. How do we do that? Okay, at least the middle horizontally. We can set the margin to auto. So setting the margin of an element to auto, it basically calculates the position of that element. CSS will calculate the position of that element and check how much space it needs to give the element, how much outer space it needs to give the element from the top, the right, the left, and the bottom in such a way that the element will be positioned at the center. But it doesn't always work, especially when you have other elements on the page, or you have the parent of that element doesn't have enough width or height to accommodate the position where that element is supposed to be. So most of the time, using margin auto will give the element an equal margin on the left and right, but it will not give it an equal margin on the top, at the top and bottom. So you can see that's exactly what happened here. It has given the element a margin, an equal margin on the right side and the left side, but not at the top and bottom. And the reason is because our body has, this is the height of our body, right? So you can see our body element does not take the entire space of the page. If our body element did, this would have been right at the center of the page. So what we are going to do is we are going to set the height of our body element to 100% so that it covers the height of the page, right? Of the height of the page. Then our form will be at just right in the middle. So we are going to select the body tag by using the tag selector. Since the entire page we have only one body, this is fine, right? So I'll set the height to 100%. And I notice that the body has a margin. You can see the yellow or the orange thing highlighting the body around it. That's basically the margin of the body. I don't want the body to have a margin. The body is given a margin by default most of the time. So I'm going to remove this margin by setting margin here to 0. You can see our body, does it have a height of 100%? Kind of. I think our HTML, that's where our HTML ends too. Let's see if we set our HTML to 100%, if it's going to take that space. H 100%, 100%. Okay, so first off, I removed the margin of the body, and you can see that the form is basically touching the top of the page because initially there was a margin there, and I've removed it. So even if we've set the height of the body to 100%, it's still not taking 100% of the page. That's because the HTML element doesn't have a height of 100%. So if we actually set the HTML element to 100%, we'll have our form not necessarily at the center, honestly speaking. You can't really trust margin auto. You can't really trust margin auto to put your element at the center of the page. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. But either way, let me see. Give me a second. So the reason why this is not at the center is because of this div. Why do we have this div here? I'm going to take this div out because we are not using it. So now we have one div after our body, and that div is what contains our form. So we are going to set the HTML tag to have, that's the entire page, to have a height of 100%. And we have the body will have a height of 100%. That will make our form container to be at just hopefully in the center. Let's see. Okay. Not really. So there's actually another way we could put this right at the center of the page, but I've not actually talked about it yet, so I don't want to introduce it so it doesn't cause any confusion. For that reason, I'm going to leave this at the bottom, else we would have used something called flexbox, where we will use like display, but that's when I'm talking about layout, and layout is next weekend. So I'm going to not talk about it. So we'll leave our form like this for now because of time. We'll leave our form like this for now. So what we have done is we have designed uh the box that contains our form. We've given it a color, we've given it a border, and it looks better than it did before. And based on the fact that the CSS that we have written is an external CSS, we can basically apply the same style to the login page without having to write any CSS, any extra CSS at all. So what we are going to do next week is I'll talk about layouts. Everything I've talked about so far are in the resources that I shared. So if you do well to go through the resources, you at least you even basically read up on what I'm going to talk about next week. Like I'm going to talk about layouts. I'm going to talk about how you position elements on the page, how you structure a page in such a way that how you look at a design and basically know how to structure your HTML and how to write your CSS to look like that design. I'll talk about that. I might not actually show it yet. Um, then I think we'll add more style to our form to make it look better. We'll move some of these things around, make it look kind of like an actual professional looking form, right? So that's that. Thank you for joining this class. I I see that there are no questions in the chat, so uh, you can still leave questions. I'm going to post this video again. This I'm going to actually hide this stream when I post the video so that all the questions will come in from one place. So that's the video that I'll post and I'll share the link. So yeah, that's that. Don't forget about the resources. The resources will be in the description of this live, and it will be in the description of the video I'm going to share. So don't forget to go through those. And I'll see you next week. Bye.